Hello and welcome to my code screencast for my project in TDDD27 Advanced Web Programming at Linköping University. For my project Budget Finder, my name is Karlsson. I will go through the very code I have for my project, mainly the most important parts and so on. And the main focus will be put on the front end, but some of the back end as well, which is also where I will begin. The backend I created using SQLite and Flask, and all code is written in Python. And SQLite, you put basically to save things in the database, you just create these tables of data, where each row, like in the table for users, each row includes an email, username, and password, which is all the data for an actual user. And then you create various tables for everything you want to save, so you have simple way to just access the data, update the data, and so on. And the next part that can go quickly basically is the decorators, which are just created so I didn't have lots of repeated code, so everything that had required a token didn't have these exact same lines. Instead I put a decorator, which made it better, more nice to look at basically. And optional token is for places where you can use a token, but it's optional. So it returns the actual email if it is a token, otherwise it returns none. Then we have socket handler, which initializes the socket IO instance. The socket itself is used for live updates. I can continue into the app.py where you join a budget, basically join a budget room. This is sent using socket emit from the front end, which sends the budget name and owner email to this, which then you create a room ID using this, which you then use to join the room using the function join room from the socket IO. When you are in a room, then you send messages through it. When someone sends basically a message, then the data now refetches for everyone in the room live without having to update the page. Doing this, it could simply be implemented with live updates within budgets, which I will get more to when I get to the front end. But otherwise, the backend is put up by database utils and routes. The routes handle the actual communication with the front end using HTTP requests. And here you also see a decorator use, check required token. These also use the actual emit to socket emit to notify that changes have been made. Can be seen here when you update the budget status as an example. But otherwise, these get the data from the front end and mainly just uses it to check the data is actually there and then communicate with functions like budget exist that come from database utils. These routes modules basically are saved into a blueprint, which is like a mini app, which can then, using registered blueprints, be put into the main Flask application. So everything can be used in the same way as if it was one huge file for the app. And if we get now to the database utils, here are the actual functions that communicate with the database. Like all the selects and put into the database, saves data, deletes data, and so on, are in this folder, database utils folder. These then return the data they get, or so on. If it changes the data, it just changes the data, but otherwise it gets the data, sent it back to the routes, which is then sent to the front end. This, as I said, they communicate with actual database. And there are also things like the hash password. It doesn't really communicate with the database, but it's a helper function to using decrypt, which is a way to simply encrypt the passwords so you don't save pure strings in the database. It basically creates you encrypt it, a simple way to encrypt it basically by creating other symbols for everything that is saved. So you can't just check the database to get someone's password. And it also generates a token and so on, which is the authorization token. But otherwise, we can continue with the front end now. And the communication with the database first of all, which come from the API folder. which I'll use the request function, which is here. So instead of having repeat the code in every function that's almost the same, I use the request function, which gets the path, the method or so on, if token is used, the token, and a body like a JSON if it's necessary, to send to the backend. And it gets the result by sending a HTTP request you can fetch, and receives the data, which is saved and checked as a JSON file. And this should also be mentioned. In the backend, if you sign in, and then it checks if there is already that user logged in, then it removes the token from the database. And if that happens, this will also, basically if it happens that someone that had an old login, say you're signed in on that user, then you sign in on another place on the same user, the first place the token will be deleted. But if they then do a change, then this fault will happen. And then the session storage will also remove the item which invalidates the token, and then you will be put to the sign-in page again. So it's just a way to make sure you're not signed in on the same user on multiple instances. Otherwise, these are the functions used in the front end to communicate with the backend, which, as you see, they use the request function everywhere to send the communication. Otherwise, we can continue to this file, which just sets up the actual socket instance in the front end, creates the socket, ensures that the out connect is false, since you should, in my program release, I've not used it to always be socket connected, only when you're within a budget that uses live updates. So yes, we can continue to components. These budget components are like things that is a part of a budget. These are put to its own component because basically similar or the same code is used at multiple places in the program where a budget is shown, basically. So instead of just repeating code everywhere, they use the components and send the necessary data, which is then presented using the components. Read-only is used, so if it's not read-only, then you can also edit it, so those functions and inputs and such that is used to edit the function will be visible. Otherwise, if it is read-only, those will not be visible and you can only see the budget. These go for all of these, which basically they send the information they need and so on. I will show this later. Here also you send a base path, as you can be in the budget page, you can be in the budget display page, and so on. And depending on these, you will be redirected in different ways, which is used here using the link function, which links you to different URLs, basically, depending on if it's your own budget page, if it's someone else's budget page, a public budget page, or so on. Otherwise, there's not too much to show here. The navigation bar is just the navigation bar top to navigate through various pages. Depending on your signed in or signed out, it shows different things. If you sign out, you will see sign in and sign up, and home, of course, that's always shown. And if you sign in, you will see sign out and profile instead. We can go back to the app now, which is where the actual pages are created. So I have pages for sign up. Of course, first of all, the home page, which is just the home page with a search bar, which uses the use router, use effect, and use state, which I can get to more later. The use router, simple to explain, is what I use to navigate through various pages in my project. So when you actually do a search, you will be redirected to search result using the search text as a query parameter. Basically, this will be sent into that page, which can then get all the search results from the database using the search. Trimmed is just remove white space, so it's only the actual keywords you search with. And otherwise, this will just show that you have a sign up page, which simple input parameters. You can input your email, your username and password and so on to create a user. which is then added to the database. Signs you in if you have already created an account. This lets you sign in on that. The search results are where you are redirected for the home page if you search. So this then get the query parameters, search params, which comes from next navigation, which gets then since I use Q here, everything after Q equals will be saved as the query, which is used to send to the database and the backend to get the search results for what the user searched for, basically. And router, once again, is used to redirect you to pages. And use effects I can go into more later, but basically in this case, it's since this is filled with query and sort mode, the effect will run every time you mount the component, query is changed or sort mode is changed. So every time one of those is changed or you mount a component, all this will run. So it gets all the data again, or it resources it depending if you choose to have last updated at the top, higher rating at the top or low rating at the top, and which then it gets from the database and reloads everything. And it's a very simple way, an effective way in React. I'm pretty sure it's from React, not Next. From React to say do things on mount or when things changes. And use state I use just to save states, like error messages, the loading state, sort mode state or result state, and so on. Just to save a state so it's saved in the entire page until it's updated again. And we can continue into the budgets, actually. A budget page itself. First of all, it's budget page, which shows all your budgets. If you have are invited as editor to a budget, it shows all of those. Same with viewer, or if you have save budget, it shows those as well. If you click on a budget, you will be redirected to the save budget page with the specific budget you have saved. But otherwise, you have a table of all your own budgets, or the opportunity to create your own budgets. Otherwise, there are lots of handle functions, like the handle delete budget, which is called when you delete a budget, which then communicates with the backend, deletes the budget from the database, and sends it back the information that has been deleted. And here are more states, like input value, which is when you change the actual input to the input, and sets it to a state, which is always updated to the newest state. But more interestingly, and the most interesting part, I think, of the project is how this is called. You see, this is on more pages, but it's used in the exact same way. It's square brackets ... slug, which is from Next.js. The website on Next.js has very good information on this. Basically, it's a catch-all route in Next.js. How it's used is by using the use params from Next Navigation, which I saved as slug, which is just a standard name. So the use params basically all of the budgets here in the URL is the slug. This is then saved as an array by using the .slug to the slug. Except actually if it's one parameter, but since I save it as a string array, it will still be an array, but with one element in it only. So using this, I get all of these as a what should I call it? As an array, of course, with the various spots, which you can recreate the path from, which is then saved to the database, with the purpose of using as a key, basically, because all the paths will be unique for a specific budget element. And the first of these, like 0, is used a lot since that's the first page, which is the actual name of the budget, the main budget, the top element. So using this, you can get the parent path, the current name, and so on, which is very simple to then use to navigate down through various levels of the budget. This made it possible to create budgets within budgets within budgets within budgets, and then save the path to the database so it can simply be recreated and reaccessed. And otherwise, here I also use the use callback function. This is for the purpose of getting socket to work correctly. As I explained earlier, here the socket emit is sent, which is sent then to join the budget into the backend, which joins the budget room basically. And this makes it so live updates will happen. So information sent to the socket room, which then sends the information to all the various users in that room, which fetches data for new and everything updates. The room ID is created to then be able to turn off, to leave the room basically, and then also socket off. And here is why use callback is necessary. Use callback ensures that if not the slug is updated, then it references the same fetch data function. Otherwise it would create new instances all the time when it's created here. And that was a problem because it quickly made things slower and slower and slower and create a huge problem. But using use callback, as it's then a reference to the same instance of the function, then it will actually close it off and leave work to then unmount, to turn off the listener, and it will only have one reference all the time, except for when it's necessary to change it, when slug changes. And otherwise, there's not too much about this page to go through. The main things from React and Next are the use route, the use params, use effect, use state, and use callback, which I've gone through all of them. And here I can also show how the various components are used, which I showed earlier. It sends the various data that's necessary. As this is not read-only, it will not send a read-only, which then will be false standard. And it sends the function that's necessary to change data, since you're allowed here. However, in like budget display, which is only viewing a public budget, you will not send the various functions that updates data, and you have read-only true. This makes it so you can only actually see the data, but you cannot update it, and you will not be visible the input parameters to change data. And this is also why it's so useful to have these components, because on all the places where it just shows the budget, you can just send the necessary data to the component, which then show through the component. In this one you have editors and viewers, so depending on if you're an editor or viewer, which is set this variable, either you send empty or you send handle add income, add set income, so basically the functions, the updates data. And there is read-only set through if you're an editor or not. Editor can change data, a viewer cannot. So this is a simple way to send the correct data. Otherwise, there's not much to show. The profile page is simple. It's just a page showing your information and letting you change username and password by communicating with the backend. And a way to redirect to the actual budget page using useWriter, which is basically everything for my program. I'm happy that you have viewed this, and that was the most important parts of the code, I think, for the program or project I have created using this course. And thank you so much for listening.